Join me as I sew up some last minute gift ideas. Hi, my name is Fallon and today I'm going to be sharing a bunch of last minute gift ideas. These are all going to be quick sews and very easy to bring them together. And as a bonus, I've also organized this video into different categories so you can jump around and find the gift ideas you are looking for very easily. All right, so let's jump right into sewing. I'm gonna start with some gift ideas for the person in your life that likes to cook. All right, so first up, we're going to sew together a really cute apron. This apron is just going to tie around the waist. It's going to be quick and easy. As a bonus, it only takes 4 fat quarters. So I grabbed some cute coordinated fat quarters here. And then I highly suggest you use some woven interfacing. It'll help stabilize the apron area a little bit better. Woven interfacing works really great because it sort of still feels like fabric, so it's not going to make this project really stiff. I really like using Shapeflex. I'll link to it in the description of this video. Pick one out that you want to use for the tie to tie around the waist, and then pick one out that you want to use for the pocket. Now I'm going to take the 3 fabrics that are not the tie ribbon and I'm going to go ahead and fuse the woven interfacing onto the back of each one. So yes, even the pocket, I want the pocket to be nice and stabilized so that whatever this person is putting in the pocket doesn't just fall right out. It'll give it a little more structure. Now, as for the tie fabric, cut it into as many 3-inch strips as you can so that you have a nice long tie to be able to tie the apron on. All right, so I have my fabric prepped. So you're gonna have 2 of the panels that are pretty much a full fat quarter that you have fused your woven interfacing to the back of if you're choosing to use it. And then I trimmed up any selvage that it was on the fat quarter and I made sure to square both of the panels up to this exact same size. Then what I did was I stacked the fat quarters on top of each other, and on the bottom of the panels I cut a curve in the fabric just to make it, you know, a little more professional looking. So I did that on both sides of the bottom of the fat quarter, and the top I kept squared on both of them. Now for the fat quarter that we chose for the pocket, I cut it in half after fusing the woven interfacing onto the back. For me, that size was 10.5 inches by 18 inches for both of these pockets. And then here is the tie. So let me show you how I prepped the tie that we're going to use to tie the apron around our waist. So the first thing I did was I sewed all of the 3-inch strips together end to end. And just to let you know, I ended up using 4 strips to make this tie. So I sewed all the strips together and then I pressed the seam open really well. And then what I did first was I folded the strip in half just like I would a binding. So after I folded it in half, I opened it up and I folded the ends into that middle line I creased. And then I folded it in half again to hide all of those raw edges of the strip. And I just have these clips here holding it in place. Now I wanted the tie ends to look really nice and clean. So let me show you how I folded those in together. But to finish off those ends of the tie, you want to open it up and then we're going to fold it in to a point and then fold it closed and press it really well. Now it might not hold well on its own. It didn't for me and I didn't want to have to keep fussing with it. So I used some glue to hold it in place. So I'm using this Acorn Precision Piecing glue. It works really, really well. So I dabbed some glue here when it's completely open. I folded them in And to set it and seal it really well, you can iron that. So it'll kind of dry the glue nice and quick so you don't have to keep fussing with it or wait for it to dry. So I'm just gonna set it with some heat from my iron. And then we're just gonna put some glue on it one more time and set it again. Fold it. Then we have a really nice pointed end to that tie. And then press it again just to keep it closed. Now don't do glue all the way down this tie because some of it is going to attach to the top of the apron. So we want to keep it open so we can attach it onto there. All right, so now the tie is all prepped and ready to go. All right, so now let's work on the pocket. The first thing you're going to do is fold it right sides together. And then I'm gonna put a few clips on here to hold it together. We're going to need to keep an opening here so that we can flip the pocket right sides out when we're done sewing around it. So I always mark the opening that I want to have because I am notorious for just sewing right past it and forgetting to leave an opening. All right, so leave a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch seam allowance, whatever you feel comfortable with. I'm gonna backstitch really well because we don't want this pocket popping open. And then I backstitch really well at the line I drew to flip this. All right, now before we flip this right side out, kind of trim off the corners. Just make sure you don't cut through any threads. This will help you leave some nice points after you flip. All right, and then we're just gonna turn this pocket right side out. I'm just using my, my purple thing tool to push out the corners as much as I can. And then I like to rub it across the seam to try to get that nice and even as well. All right, and then we're going to press the pocket really well. And we have that opening, so you want to fold it in the seam allowance that you used and get it nice and even so that you can sew over it and seal this pocket closed. And the reason we did it this way is so that both sides of it, the inside of the pocket is nice and pretty as well. So I'm going to press this really well. And then we have that opening there, and I'm just going to choose to go ahead and top stitch this side to be the top of my pocket so that I can go ahead and make sure that closes up. So to top stitch, I'm going to move my stitch length up to 3, and I'm going to get about 1/8 of an inch close to the edge and just stitch across here. Okay, so then it's nice and finished. So now all we have to do is attach this to our apron front. And I'm going to make sure that I'm attaching it to the middle of this panel. So I'm just gonna fold the panel in half and I'm gonna crease that really well. But just to make sure I can find it while I'm measuring with my ruler, I'm gonna put a pin there because I know I'm not gonna see that crease really well. So that is the middle. And then I'm gonna do the same thing with the top of my pocket. And a little tip for you here is you can look at both sides of it, look at the stitching and see which side you think looks a little nicer and make sure that's on the outside. So I'm gonna do the same thing and I'm gonna put a pin there. All right, so now I'm gonna grab a ruler and I'm gonna measure down 4 inches. And I'm gonna make sure my ruler is nice and straight across there because that will make sure that I know my pocket is lined up nice and straight. All right, so now that I have this in place, I kind of like to hold it up and make sure I think it looks good there. Decide if I need to move it up or down any, but it looks nice and even, which is good. All right, so now we're just gonna sew around here. Now when I sew around, I'm gonna do 1/8 of an inch again. You could do double sewing lines here if you think the person that is going to be using this is gonna be putting some heavy things in here. I would recommend doing 1/8 of an inch around and then doing 1/4 inch around from that, just to make sure the pocket is nice and secure. So I'm keeping the stitch length at 3, and I'm going to back stitch a lot right here, just so that the top of the pocket is secure. And then I'm going to go around the side, the bottom, and the side. I'm not going to close off the top. And so there you go. There is one of the apron fronts, and you can see there's the pocket. So you can leave it one whole pocket, or you could sew some lines to divide it out. It's really up to you. I'm gonna leave one big pocket so that it would be nice to put some recipes in that are being worked on, and you could still put some other things that you have, but definitely you could add some dividers if you wanted to. So now this project is going to finish up very quickly. Just place these right sides together so it lines up really nicely, and then pop some pins in to hold it in place. All right, and so if your stitch length is still turned up high for top stitching, roll that back down, and we're going to sew along the side, the bottom, and the side of this apron. Leave the top open. I'm going to back stitch at the start. Then when you get to the curve at the bottom, just go very slowly, just rotating the fabric as you go. All right, and so when you get back around to the top of the apron again, back stitch really well. All right, so down at this curve, I'm going to cut a few small pleats in just so that will lay nice and flat. And I'm going to do that on both edges. Just make sure not to cut through any threads. And then we can flip it right side out. All right, and then I rub my fingers across this seam to get it laying nice and flat and even. It just kind of helps relax the seam and have it lay nice and even. Once you get it to where you're happy with it, press the entire apron here, and then we'll attach on the tie. So here's how both sides of the apron is looking. So this step is optional, but I think it gives it a really nice finished look. I'm just going to top stitch around the entire edge of the apron. I'm moving my stitch length up to 3 and doing this about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. All right, so I finished the top stitching, and now we are going to attach on the tie. So to do that, find the middle of your apron at the top. And again, I'm going to put in a pin there. And then find the middle of the tie and put a pin in there. And then we're going to match up the middles. So I'm opening up the fold of my tie and attaching it to the top of my apron. Now just make sure it's nice and flush with the top of your apron so that when we stitch this in place, it's going to be even on the front and the back. So look how that is turning out. That's going to be so cute. So we're going to stitch all the way around the entire tie. So I'm going to stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the top here, go all the way around the tie to the point, come back around and stitch along the other side, going all the way around the entire tie. It'll finish this off beautifully, and I'm leaving it at that top stitch length. All right, so there we go. There is the apron, both sides of it. So cute and comes together so fast. All right, so let's move on to our next project, and that is an oven mitt slash pot holder. So it's a very versatile project that can be used in two different ways. Now for the main part of this project, you are going to need two different fabrics, or at least that's how I think it looks nice. So you're going to cut 4 circles out of the fabric, 2 of your main fabric. So here are the circles here. Now I just used a lid from one of my pots that I thought would be a nice size, and I used that as a template to cut my circles from the fabric and from the batting. And then you're going to need 3 pieces of batting. This is a great time to use up your scrap batting. I highly recommend using 100% cotton. And then you're also might want to use some thermal fleece. I will link to it in the description of this video, but this will help reflect heat. And again, I'm layering it with some batting just because if you are going to use it as an oven mitt, you really want to protect yourself from that heat. And then I used just 2 fat quarters to bring all this fabric together. And from the fat quarter that I cut, the 2 circles that I folded in half, I also cut batting strips, 2.5-inch strips, and sewed those end to end to make a binding for this project. Now you can see I have my 2 fabrics layered with the pretty side of the fabric facing out, and then that thermal fleece layer and my batting here. And I'm going to just layer these even, and I'm going to quilt this so that it looks nice and beautiful. Now I have my fabric folded in half here so that I have a nice straight line to sew across to start. I have my stitch length up at 3, and I'm just gonna sew across here. I'm gonna go a little slow because this is a lot of layers. Look at how puffy that is from all layers. I'm gonna check the other side to make sure the stitching looks good because I don't usually sew with this many layers. And then I'm gonna use my quilt lock to space out my stitches without having to draw lines all over my fabric. So I'm lining up the line on my quilt lock with the previous set of stitches, and then I'm just sewing right along the edge of the ruler to get some straight lines without having to mark. And I'm just going to keep doing that all the way across this circle. All right, so now I'm going to sew some stitches going in the opposite direction to get some nice pretty squares across here. Some beautiful quilting. Oh my goodness, so how cute is this so far? So we have the main part done, and then we're going to need to make the part that is going to be where your hand goes in to be able to pick up pots with this as well. So I have one finished and it'll go along one side, but let me show you how to prep this. So all you need to do is put the circle batting inside and then just fold it over with the right sides facing out, and then we're just going to quilt it. Make sure it's nice, flat, and even. And then I just quilted it nice and tight together, about 1/4 inch apart, but quilt it however you would like, just like with the main part of this. Since these stitches are so close together, I'm alternating back and forth so the fabric doesn't pull too far in one direction. All right, so if you need to trim around these to clean up loose threads, or if the fabric stretched a bit, get rid of some of the loose batting if needed. I'm going to do that to all of the pieces. All right, and so then find the side that you like the best of your main part. I like this side the best, so I'm going to attach the opening that we're going to have for the hand to the other side. Now put some clips in place and then check to see if there's too much overhang anywhere. I have a little bit here that I'm going to trim off. I'm going to keep my stitch length up and I'm going to just base stitch around here. It probably isn't going to catch all of it. I'm doing just about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge, but it'll just make it a little bit easier for me to sew the binding on. All right, so it's just kind of holding it all together a little bit for me. And now we're just going to attach the binding on. So I'm going to sew the binding on to what I'm calling the back, and that's going to be the opening for the hand. Then I'm going to flip it to the front and sew it in place. And I'm just going to slowly sew it on. Now, if you had enough fabric and did a bias binding, that'll be so much easier for you here. But I'm just going to go really slow. I turned my stitch length back down to 2. So I'm just going to sew really carefully around here. Just lining the raw edge of my binding up with the raw edge of my pot holder / oven mitt. So I'm just going to fold over my binding, one end of it, and then insert the other side into it, just to do this nice and easy because joining it together on a curve would be so hard. So I'm just having this folded over and lining everything up. All right, now we're just gonna flip the binding over to the front and top stitch it down. So I am going to put my stitch length up to 3 again. That's the length I like for top stitching. And then I'm just gonna stitch all the way around here, about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. I'm gonna go really slow, making sure my binding's laying nice and flat. All right, so how cute is this? So you have this side that you could set a pot on, and with all these layers of batting here, you're going to have your surface nice and protected. And then you have the other side that has room for you to put your hand in so you can get a pot or casserole dish out of the oven. Such a fun gift. Now, before we move on to the next gift you can quickly sew up, I want to show another version of this project, and that's with making a patchwork main portion of this. But I just need to get the patchwork sewn up. So what I like to do is take the first 2 fabrics in the first row, lay them right sides together, and I'm just going to sew a 1/4 inch seam. And this is a good way to sew any patchwork together. Now these are the first 2 in the second row. And I'm not cutting any threads. All right, so all those are sewn together. And then what I'm gonna do is press the first row to the left and the second row to the right. So later when I sew all the rows together, they're going to nest together. So the seams in each row are going to go in opposite directions. And then I'm going to keep adding the next fabric in the row on. Just going to press these really well. Make for easier pressing later. All right, so press the seam in the same direction as the first seam in each row. All right, and so this is why I like to sew patchwork together this way, because it keeps all of my fabric in order the way I laid it out, because all the threads is holding everything together. So I'm gonna press this really well and then sew the rows together. All right, and since I sewed each row in opposite directions, the seam just nests together. I can feel where it meets, and I'll get nice, perfect points on this patchwork. All right, so after sewing and pressing your patchwork panel really well, now all you need to do is cut it into a circle and sew it together just like the other pot holder slash oven mitt. It's going to be so adorable. All right, so now we are on to the last quick gift for the person who likes to cook in your life. And I think this gift is going to be the quickest to make in this category. And that is because you're going to start with an Orphan block that you already have. This Orphan block that I have is an Ohio Star quilt block. I have quite a few videos for beautiful quilt blocks on my channel, so I'll link to this one and a few of them down in the description of this video. Now, what we are going to be making is a casserole hot pad, so an oversized pot holder basically. Now, I cut my backing fabric to 11 inches by 14 inches, and I cut some of that thermal poly fleece to about the same size, as well as an extra piece of batting, and then I glue basted those together. Cut my segments for the fabric that I want to surround this with, so some for the top and bottom that we're going to sew on first, and then the sides. And we're going to do this in kind of a quilt as you go manner, and then we're going to quilt the whole thing. And then all we're going to have to do is bind this project. I cut my binding to 2.5 inches, and then I sewed it together end to end and pressed the seam open, and then I just folded it in half. So I prepped the binding as I normally would. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is sew our fabric onto the top and bottom here. So I'm just gonna line it up on the top of my block, right sides together, and sew a 1/4 inch seam across here. This is gonna come together so fast, and it's the perfect way to use up blocks that you already have. Right, we're just gonna press that up. And then I can trim this down to the 10 inches by 13 inches. I wanted it to be after I finish the top here and get it quilted. That way I can square it up based around the block really nicely if I want to. All right, and then I'm gonna sew the bottom segment on. So something you could do if you have a smaller block that you wanna use is just kind of go around it like a log cabin style, sewing little segments on. There's so many different ways you can make this a fun project to gift to someone. All right, now that I have 2 of these on, I'm gonna press it. All right, and then I'm gonna sew on these sides. So right sides together, and then I'm just gonna press it over. Now you could use this method to make some placemats if you wanted to. In that instance, I probably wouldn't use the thermal fleece. I would probably just use 1 piece of batting. All right, so we have the stitches here that are holding it together pretty good. So what I need to do is make a decision as to whether I want to do some more quilting on here or not. I think I might put a few diagonal lines across here just to add a little more fun. I'm not going to do a ton of quilting because this is so thick and I don't want to get a lot of bunching on here. So I'm just lining up my quilt lock line with the seam going across the star here to just add a little bit of extra quilting. Lining that line on this quilt lock up with the seam is going to help keep my diagonal lines nice and straight here. So I'm just going to do that along each of these seams. And I think that's all the quilting I'm going to do, just because I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to add too much on here and risk getting a lot of bunching. And I think that'll be enough to hold this together for when it needs to be washed, since it's a small piece. All right, so there we go. Look at how beautiful that is. And the design on the back turned out really fun too with the way I quilted that. So I'm so happy with how this is turning out. Now all I need to do is trim it up to the size I want and put the binding on it. All right, so I ended up trimming mine up to 11 inches by 14 inches. So now I'm going to attach the binding onto the back, meeting up the raw edges. I'm going to leave a bit of a tail so that I have room to join the ends together. And I'm just going to sew around the edge here. All right, so when I got a 1/4 inch away from the edge, I kept my needle down and I pivoted my fabric so I could sew right to the corner of my panel. Now I'm going to fold my binding up, leaving a 45-degree angle here, and then fold my binding back down, and then I'm just going to start sewing again. All right, and since I join my bindings together with just a straight seam, I am going to just cut my binding and leave a 1/2 inch overlap to join it together. So I'm gonna cut my binding and then fold the other side over and leave a 1/2 inch overhang, cut, and then I'm going to sew those ends together and finish sewing this binding on. All right, so now I'm just flipping the binding to the front and I'm going to top stitch it down. I'm going to top stitch it down about 1/8 inch from the edge of the binding, going all the way around. Oh my goodness, this came together so fast and it is just so darn cute. I would seriously be happy to gift this to anyone, and honestly would be happy to keep it for myself too because it turned out so cute. All right, so we're going to move on to another category of sewn gifts, and these are all for the person who loves to read in your life. So the first 2 gifts we're going to sew are different types of bookmarks. For the first example, you're going to need 3 4-inch squares, and then one of the 4-inch squares you're going to fold in half along the diagonal. One of the 4-inch squares you're going to fuse a woven interfacing onto it, and the other one's just going to hang out there and be used when it's time. All right, so I'm serious, this gift's going to come together so fast. All you need to do is grab that triangle and lay it right along one of the squares you have, line it up, and then take the other one and lay it right sides together on top of that. And then we're going to mark an opening along one of the sides that just has 2 pieces of fabric. Well, you don't have to mark an opening, but I like to mark the opening because I will forget to leave an opening if I don't. All right, and then we're just gonna sew all the way around this. Just make sure everything stays lined up. If you need to add some pins, I probably should, but I'm just gonna sew around. So start out one of the marked lines, leaving the opening behind it, backstitch. When you get to the edge, leave your needle down, lift up your foot, and then continue sewing around. All right, so we have the opening there, and then we're just going to clip the corners. Make sure not to cut through any stitches. And then let's just turn this so the right side is facing out. It can be a little difficult because this is a small project, so you know, it can be hard to push it through the hole. So before we move on and completely finish this quick project, I want to show you something really fun. You see how this triangle is on the side with the polka dots? Well, this is the part that the book sleeve is going to slide over the page. Now, if you prefer, you could flip it to the other side and have it there to have a different look to it. But I am going to keep it on this side and have the houses on the other. But I just wanted to show you that you can kind of reverse that and decide which way you want it to go. Now, the last thing we want to do is turn these raw edges that we use to flip the bookmark right side out. We want to turn that in. So we're going to press this really well and then top stitch all the way around. So top stitching around here kind of plays 2 parts. It's going to finish this off really nicely, but it's also going to close up that opening that we left to turn this bookmark. And there you go, another cute project done. Just slide this opening over the page of the book you need to mark, and you have a cute little bookmark. I think these would be so fun to gift if you have that neighborhood library box. You could put a few of these in there and brighten up someone's day. All right, so here's another quick version of a bookmark I want to show you. So first, cut 2 6-inch by 2-inch rectangles, and then onto the back of them, fuse and woven interfacing. Now, if you would like, you could cut some string. I just looped it around my hands, kept one side tucked together, tied a string around it, and then cut the top of the strings. It's just optional if you just want it to have a cute little extra accent on it. Now, to make this really easy to sew, what I like to do is, if I'm using the string, I place it in the middle on the wrong side of one side, and then I use some glue. I'm just going to use this applique glue to hold everything in place for me. Trust me, it just makes it a whole lot easier with this step. And then I'm going to line this up and lay them together. And I'm going to press this to dry the glue up for me. All right, and so now that it's held together, I'm just going to sew around here, but unlike other times, I'm going to sew around 1/4 inch because I'm going to trim this up to just make sure it's lined up all nice and beautiful. All right, I backstitched over the strings really well just to make sure they're nice and secured. All right, and so then I'm just gonna use these Karen Buckley scissors to cut around here very carefully, making sure I don't cut through any of the threads. I like using these scissors for this since it has a raw edge. These scissors have a small serrated blade that will help keep this fabric from unraveling on me. Just gonna cut very carefully across where the threads are at the top. And I'm gonna do that on both sides. And then I'll be able to cut all the way around the rest of it really easily. All right, and so there you go. Another quick and easy gift comes together so nicely, and it's perfect to pair with a book for someone who loves to read. If you are gifting to someone who likes to quilt, I highly recommend you look at one of my recent videos that reviews 5 different quilting novels. It will sure to be a great gift to pair one of these bookmarks with one of those fun books to a quilter who likes to read. So I love to read, and I love to bring a book with me, especially when I'm going somewhere where I know I may be sitting and waiting for a little bit. But what I don't like to happen is for me to throw my book in my purse or something like that and get pages bent up. One fun thing to have on hand is a quick book sleeve, and you can make these yourself, and choosing the fabric is so much fun, especially if it's somebody that you're going to gift it to. You can find a fabric that you know they will really like. So I cut my fabric to 8 inches by 10 inches, but you'll want to cut it to whatever size you think will be most useful for the book size that you normally read, or a good size for gifting to somebody. Now, I first cut my main fabric to 8 inches by 10 inches, and I have 2 of these, and I chose this really cute fabric that has bookmarks all over it. And then you're going to have a lining fabric, and you're going to need 2 of those as well. Cut them to the same size, 8 inches by 10 inches, and then you'll need 2 pieces of batting. Again, another great time to use up some scrap batting you have. So line up your main fabric on the batting, and then we're just going to quilt it really quickly. I turned my stitch length up to 3, and I'm just going to sew some wavy lines across here and just have fun with this. Do any type of quilting you would like. Okay, and make sure to do some quilting on both of the panels. After doing the quilting on both of the panels, trim them up if needed. Make sure they are both still 8 by 10 or whatever size you are choosing to do. All right, so now put your main panels right side together, and we're going to sew around 3 sides of it at a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch seam. I know sometimes I like to sew things like this at a 1/2 inch seam just to make sure the seam doesn't pop open at some time when it's something I'm putting stuff into. So I'm gonna go ahead and do the 1/2 inch seam. So I'm gonna start at the side and back stitch, and then sew all the way around the side, the bottom, and the side, leaving the top open. All right, I'm going to clip the corners on this just because I want them to come out nice and pointy after I'm finished with this. And now we are going to sew the lining. The lining we are going to put right sides together as well. But on this one, we're going to leave a couple more openings. I'm being dramatic, we're just leaving 2 openings, but it is a little different than the main part of the bag. We are going to leave the top open completely, but on the bottom, we're going to leave an opening to turn this bag later. So again, I'm going to mark it so I don't sew there. So again, sew the same allowance you did with the main part of the bag. If you sewed a 1/4 inch, sew that. If you sewed a 1/2 inch, sew that. So I did a 1/2 inch, so I'm gonna sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance around here. All right, so there we go. We have the top of the bag left open here. So what I did was I sewed along one side and then over to where I marked, back stitched, clipped the threads, and then started sewing on the other side. I back stitched so that the stitches didn't come undone when I'm flipping this. Sewed to the corner and then up the side and back stitched really well. All right, and so I'm gonna flip the lining right side out. Here I like to go ahead and make sure that I don't have any openings. I caught everything. There's no holes aside from the one I left intentionally. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna insert the lining inside of the main part of this sleeve. So always remember you're going to have right sides facing each other. And then we're going to line up the seams with each other. So I have the seams of the lining side lined up with seams of the main part of the bag. And then I'm going to put a clip in there. Then I'm going to do the same thing with the other side. And if you see here, I'm laying the seams in opposite directions just so I don't have a lot of bulk there. And then I'm just going to make sure that everything else lines up well after I put those other clips in. All right, and so since this is a small opening, it really is the trickiest part here, but we're going to sew around the bag. And I'm going to do a 1/2 inch seam allowance just like I did with everything else on this bag. Just go slow around and you should be fine. Just move the bag around as you need. All right, and now we're just able to flip the bag. So I'm gonna pull out the lining and I have that opening and I'm just gonna start pushing the main part of the bag through that opening. I have the purple thing here. I'm going to use that to push out some of the corners as much as I can. With the batting there, it may not make perfect points, but I do want to get it pushed out as much as I can. Then I like to run it along the seams too, just to make sure the seams are pushed out nicely. I do that on the lining and the main part of the bag. Push the points out on the lining as well. They are going to be inside the bag, but I still want to make sure that they're pushed out. All right, and then we really only have 2 more steps here. I am going to close up this seam. I'm just going to top stitch it closed, so I'm going to press the seam with my iron first. And since this is just going to be inside of my bag, I'm just going to top stitch all the way across here. There we go. Now the lining is sealed off, and I can just push this inside of the bag. Now I'm just going to line up the lining and the main part of the bag, get it nice and even and give it a good press. And then I am just going to top stitch around this to finish it off nicely. Cut any loose threads that you see. When I'm top stitching something like this, I almost always top stitch the inside of it. For me, it's just a lot easier that way. So mine looks like this, where I have the top pulled away and I'm top stitching on the bottom. Now you can top stitch across it this way. I'm just always worried that I won't have the bottom pulled away and I'll accidentally stitch over the bottom too and then have to pull stitches. So for me, it's just easier doing it this way. But I know a lot of people would prefer to see how the stitches look on the part that's going to be sewn more, but it's just personal preference there. So I'm going to top stitch it the way I'm the most comfortable. So there we go. There is the cute book sleeve. And I really think it would make a really good gift paired with some bookmarks. All right, so the next gift I have here is a cute tote bag. I had some amazing book themed fabric that I've been wanting to use. So this first one again has bookmarks on it, but this other one has writings on it from books like by Emily Dickinson, Lisa May Alcott. So this fabric is just perfect to pair together. So we're going to make this tote bag and it'll be perfect for going to the library with, or going book shopping with, or just using whenever you're shopping in general, but it's book themed. And I'll link to some book fabrics that I've seen down in the description if you want to use book themed fabric as well. So for the main panel, you're going to have 2 fabrics that you cut to 10 inches by 14 inches. And then you're going to have an accent fabric as well. And you'll need to cut 2 of these, and they are cut to 4.5 inches by 14 inches. You'll need 2 lining fabrics that are 14 inches by 14 inches. And then you'll be making the straps for the tote bag, and those are cut to 4 inches by 22 inches. So the nice part is that this bag comes together almost exactly like the book sleeve, except for we're going to add on the straps. Now, if you would like to quilt the outside of this bag just like with the book sleeve, you can do that as well. Once we bring the accent fabric and the main fabric together, just cut some batting to size and quilt it. I'm going to make this a really light tote bag, so I'm omitting the batting because I want to be able to roll it up and store it really easily. So the first thing you'll want to do is sew your accent fabric onto the top of one of your main fabrics. And I have this directional fabric, so I'm going to make sure the words are facing up when I sew it on. At first, I thought the bookmarks were directional as well, but you can see some of them are upside down and some are right side up. So for that fabric, it doesn't matter as much. So I'm going to place these right sides together, line them up well, and sew a 1/4 inch seam across here. All right, and then I'm going to press the seam. So I'm going to finger press it first and then press it with the iron. And then we're going to do the same thing with the other 2 fabrics. All right, so I have the 2 main panels of the tote bag finished. And now we just need to get the straps prepped. So we're going to first fold the strap in half and then press it really well. And then once it is pressed, you're going to fold both ends to meet at that crease line you pressed. Okay, so once they're in there at that crease line, press it really well again. All right, and so now your strap should look somewhat like this. And what you're going to do is fold it in half again. But this time when it's in half, all of those raw edges are going to be tucked and hidden away inside. So give it another quick press. All right, and now we're going to top stitch around the entire strap about 1/8 of an inch from the edge. I like to start at the end of the strap because that will get hidden away later. All right, and so do the exact same thing for the other strap. All right, so now that both straps are finished, we need to attach them onto the main part of the bag. So the first thing we need to do is mark the bag as to where we want the straps to go. So the first thing you'll want to do is find the center of your bag. So I just fold it in half and find the center. If you want to measure to make sure it's perfect, it would be at the 7-inch mark since this bag panel is 14 inches wide. So I'm going to mark the middle, and then I like my straps to be about 4 inches away from that middle mark. So I'm going to measure 4 inches from that middle mark in both directions. And now we just need to line up our strap on that line. So I'm going to center it on the line and then put a clip in to hold it in place. We're going to baste this in place on the panel. And one thing you'll want to check before you baste it in place is make sure there's no twists in your strap. All right, so now repeat the same thing with the other strap and front panel. All right, so now this tote bag is going to come together so quickly. Lay your main panels right sides together, line it up well, and sew all the way around it just like you did with the book sleeve. But of course, leave the top of this tote bag open just like before. I'm sewing the seam with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And one thing you'll really want to make sure of is to not accidentally sew over any of the strap. All right, so just to make this a little bit different from the book sleeve, I'm going to show you how to box the bottom of a tote bag so that if you want it to be a little roomier there on the bottom, you'll know how to do that. So what you'll want to do is take your sewn main cover and pull it so that the seam on the bottom of the bag is laying flat and the side of the bag is folded up, and you want to get that as even as you can. So your two seams are kind of lined up along each other, the bottom of the bag and the side of the bag. And then from the point here of the, not the point of the fabric, but the point of the thread, I'm going to measure up 1 inch and I'm going to draw a line there. And then I'm going to sew right along that line and back stitch when you start and end really well. And then just snip the end off about a 1/4 inch away. All right, so we have one side done and we're going to do the same to the other side. Now make sure you fold that bottom seam in the same direction that you did on the other side. So that bottom of the bag seam is going to be laying down and the side's going to be laying up, and you want to feel them and bring them together. Line them up together. All right, measure up 1 inch, mark it. So right across that marked line, back stitch. And then cut a 1/4 inch away. All right, so there you can see how it just gives a little bit roomier of a bottom to the bag. All right, and so now we're going to put the lining fabrics right sides together, and we're going to sew along the sides, leave the top of the bag open, and leave an opening on the bottom of the bag. We're going to use that opening to turn the bag later. I'm going to sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance around it. And using the same steps as with the main part of the bag, we're going to box the corners on the lining as well. All right, so turn the lining right side out. There are nice box corners. And then we're going to insert the lining inside of the main part of the bag, making sure that the straps are inside of the bag as well. Line up the seams on the outside of the bag and put a clip in so that they stay in place there. And then just make sure the rest of the bag lines up evenly. All right, and now sew around the bag top, leaving a 1/2 inch allowance. All right, after you stitch around, turn the bag right side out. Pull the bag through the opening left in the lining. Push out all the corners. Make sure all the seams are nice and even. That opening in the lining, press it even, and then just top stitch it closed. Now push the lining inside of the bag. Once you get the bag all lined up at the top, press it and top stitch around it to finish it off. All right, so there we go, a cute and simple tote bag. All right, do you have a few more people you would like to make some gifts for? I know I do. So let's work on a new category of gifts, and these gifts are going to be for the person in your life that likes to be very organized. All right, so this gift comes together so quickly, and it's a cute little cord holder. So I don't know about you, but I have a ton of cords all over. Everything now needs to be charged by being plugged in. So some of my drawers in my house can be a complete mess, and I love making these to keep everything nice and organized. So all you'll need for this project is 2 pieces of scrap fabric that you can cut to 2.5 inches by 6 inches. So this is a fun way to use up some extra jelly roll strips if you have some of those laying around. So once I cut those 2 pieces of fabric, I just curved the edges. What I did was just grab one of my rolls of little tape for a seam guide, and I just drew a little line and curved the edges. Very, very simple. Now, if you need a smaller cord holder, just shorten the length a little bit of your rectangle and you're good to go. The only other thing you'll need for this is a piece of Velcro, or you can use a snap like I did on this cord holder. I like to use the Dritz snap fastener. You can get a lot of different decorative snaps with this. It's really, really easy to use and a lot cheaper than some of the other snap options out there. So I will link to this in the description if you'd rather use snap than the Velcro. All right, so this is another one of those gifts that is going to sew up nice and quickly. Place your fabrics right sides together, and we're going to leave an opening. So again, I'm just going to mark the area that I want to leave my opening so I don't sew past it. And then I'm just going to sew around here with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I am going to back stitch when I start sewing and when I stop sewing. Go slow around those corners. I leave my needle down and lift up my presser foot if I need to adjust. All right, and what I like to do is just add a few snips at the curves so that those curves will lay a little flatter. Just make sure you don't clip through any of your stitches. All right, and then just flip this right side out. All right, and then I'm going to use the purple thing to push out the seams nice and even. All right, you want to fold in the opening we used to flip the cord organizer, line it up nicely, and then press it really well. And then we're just going to top stitch all the way around the cord organizer, about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. This will also help close up the opening. All right, so now that we've sewn around it, all we need to do is attach the Velcro. So just pick one side to attach your first piece to, and you could make it smaller than I made this one, but it honestly doesn't really matter. You just need a fastener to close it, and then I'm just gonna sew around the piece. This is why I honestly like the snaps a little better. It looks a little cleaner when you use those, but either of them will get the job done. All right, so I have one side sewed on, and if you use a thread that matches your fabric a little better, it'll hide the look of it a little more. And then I always fold it so I can test to make sure I'm attaching the other side of Velcro on the correct side. I'm just going to center it and sew around that one. All right, and there we go. The cord organizer is done. And I also want to point out that this is a great gift for a teen or an older child for their chargers. And I'm actually going to make one of these for each of my kids. They're 15 and 16, and it is going in their stocking with this cord. So this cord is absolutely amazing. I found it on Amazon. And when you pull this apart, there are different charging ports here. So you can literally charge pretty much anything out there with this charger. It's absolutely amazing. It'll make a great gift. Perfect little gift to stick in a stocking. All right, so next we're going to move on to a really cute wall organizer idea. So you'll need an embroidery hoop. This one is 10 inches. And then you'll need 2 circles of fabric. My main fabric, I chose a fabric that I thought was really pretty and had a nice focal point on it. And then the second circle I folded in half and I fused some woven interfacing onto the wrong side of it. And then I just made sure it was a pretty accent with the main fabric as well. Now, how I did the circle around this was I just put the hoop down and I drew about an inch to an inch and a half around it, just so I had some wiggle room if I needed it. And then you'll need a piece of batting that is at least the size of your main fabric or a little larger. And this is optional. I just want to quilt a design on here. If you'd prefer not to quilt a design on this, I would just put something behind this fabric, such as a woven interfacing, just to add a little more stability to it. All right, and so to start, I'm just going to quilt a line straight down the middle of my circle. And then I'm going to use the quilt lock to quilt lines next to my straight-ish line because I just eyeballed it. All right, and then I'm going to quilt lines in the other direction. I'm going to start in the middle. And then I'm going to use the lines on my quilt lock to sew again in the opposite direction to make some quilted squares on the stitch. All right, my quilting is done, and now I'm just going to trim off the excess batting. You don't have to be perfect with it because this is all going to get hidden behind the wall organizer. All right, and so now just decide where you want the pocket to lie. Like where it looks like the flowers are just peeking out behind it. That's really cute. All right, so I'm gonna pop a pin in here to hold it in place because I really like where it is. And so now you're gonna decide if you want pocket dividers sewn into this or if you want to leave it as is. I really think I'm just gonna make 3 pockets, 2 that are smaller, maybe for pins, and then the main one be for maybe like something if you wanted to put mail there, or a notebook for making lists for maybe grocery shopping or something like that. I think that is what I'm gonna do with this one, but there's so many different ideas you could do with this. If you're making it for somebody who likes to craft or possibly quilt, you could divide the spaces for maybe scissors, a rotary cutter, a favorite ruler, different things like that. There's so many different things this could be used for. All right, so I think I'm going to make a divider right here, and I'm going to use the lines on this fabric. Okay, so I have one there, and then I think I'm going to put one right here. Now you could measure this out so it's perfect, but I'm just eyeballing this. Makes it go much quicker this way. Take out the pins, and then there you go, you have some pockets here. Now I'm gonna trim the pocket extra fabric off. And now all we have to do is put it in the hoop. So first thing I'm gonna do is twist off this screw, right? And I'm just gonna line this up where I think it'll look nice. I really wanna make sure the flower is completely in the picture here. Make sure your pocket's straight as we can get it. Maybe lower it down just a tad. Just really want the flowers to be in, and you can keep adjusting it if you need to. I'm just gonna push the frame on here and look and see if I like the way it is lined up. So there it is. So cute. I think it might be tilted just a little. No, it's pretty good. I think it's just looking like that from the flowers. So I'm just gonna tighten this back. Just gonna tighten it as much as it'll go. With all this fabric in there, it might not tighten a ton, but you just want it to be secure so that it holds this in place when it's on a wall. All right, and so with this fabric on the back here, I am going to thread baste all the way around it really wide and then pull the thread tight to just tuck it behind here so that if I ever need to make adjustments, if I'm keeping this for myself or making one for myself, I can just take out the thread, adjust it. And if I'm making it for a friend, then if they need to, they can make some adjustments. There's not really any wiggle room you can do if you trim around it, so that's why I'm choosing this method. See, how cute is that? This would look adorable hanging up on a wall. If you wanted, you could do the background as a quilt block to make it more geared toward a quilter in your life. But there's so many different things you could do with this, and it comes together so quick and it's just so cute. So our last gift for the person who likes to be organized in your life is going to require 3 pieces of fabric that are cut to 20 inches by 10 inches. So you'll have those 3 pieces of fabric, and one of them you're going to go ahead and fold in half. This is going to be the pocket that keeps everything in this nice and organized. Now for our other 2 pieces of fabric, you're going to have one that is your lining and one that is your main focal fabric. Your focal fabric you're going to pair with a piece of batting that is around the same size, at least the same size. It can be a little larger and you can trim it down later if you would like. All right, and then you're just going to quilt this. You guessed it, I'm going to do some straight lines. All right, so we have it all quilted, and now we want to add on the ribbon that's going to be used to tie this shut. So I cut my ribbon just to a nice long length. I'm just going to trim it down later if I feel like it's longer than I need to tie this shut. So you're going to lay your ribbon about in the middle of this panel, and you want to make sure it's laying on top of your fabrics, and then just baste it in place. I like to do this now because I just don't want to forget to later and not have a way to close this. All right, so now we're going to get the pocket ready. Again, it's the same size as all the other pieces of fabric, but we're going to top stitch across the top of it, and that is where the fold is. About 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. All right, and now we're going to take this and lay it on top of our lining piece. Okay, get it lined up and place some pins in it just to hold it in place. And then you'll just need to decide what you think is going to be placed in this to keep everything organized. Is it like colored pencils or markers, makeup brushes? Is it crochet hooks or knitting needles? And based on that, you're going to sew some dividers. So I think this is going to go to my daughter. She really likes to draw, so she'll probably put some drawing pencils and some colored pencils in here. So the reason I chose this lining fabric is kind of as a cheat because I knew it had these lines on it, and I was just going to use those to sew my divider lines. It's going to make it really nice and easy for me. Now, if you need to, you can of course just draw your lines on. Just make sure you use a marking tool that will be able to be erased later. So if you're using a friction pen, that'll work because you can iron over it and it'll heat erase. Just whatever you use, make sure it will be able to erase away. Now what I'm going to do is start in the middle and work out, just so that if my fabric shifts, it'll shift out to the side and not leave any weird bumps in. So when I start at the top, I'm going to back stitch a little just so those threads don't come undone. And then I'm just going to sew down off the edge. All right, and I'm just going to keep doing that all the way across here. Now, if you made this a little smaller, it would be perfect for storing crayons in for when traveling or going to a restaurant. It's much easier to see all the colors and not have to worry about the box, the crayon box starting to fall apart. I just wouldn't make the pocket as tall, just kind of measure the crayon, at least get half the size of the crayon for the pocket. and then you can adjust the height of the main panel for that. So a perfect gift for a child that likes to color as well. But this size would be great for colored pencils or markers. If you went that route, you could make a cute little matching tote bag. The tote bag would be great for putting coloring books in. And then you could put this organizing roll in with some crayons, markers, or colored pencils. All right, so clip all your loose threads that are on the front. The back is going to get hidden away, so you don't have to worry about how that looks. And then see, like a pencil would fit in here perfectly. All right, so take that lining and lay it right sides together on our quilted panel. I'm just going to clip it so that it doesn't shift as I sew. And then on the side that doesn't have the pocket for the pencils, I'm going to mark where I'm going to leave an opening to flip this right side out. So I'm going to start sewing here, and I'm going to leave a 1/2 inch seam allowance just to make sure I catch everything. All right, so clip off the corners. Make sure you don't cut through the threads, right? And then flip this right side out. Push out your corners, check to make sure you caught the entire seams of all the fabric all the way around. There's nothing worse than not checking that and then realizing later that there is a little hole. That may or may not have happened to me before. All right, and as always, I'm going to use the purple thing to push out the corners and to just slide along the seam to make sure it's nice and even. After I do that, I'm going to press this really well with, you guessed it, the whole opening seams turned in, so I can top stitch all the way around it and close off this cute roll organizer. All right, so let's close off this opening and top stitch all the way around, and we'll have another gift finished. All right, and so how you would use this is you'd put your pencil or makeup brush, knitting needle, crochet hooks, whatever it is, line them all up inside here, and then you would just roll it up. And then you have the ties here that you would tie around. And there you go. It's all nice and organized and looks really cute too. All right, so these next set of gifts are going to be gifts that you could give to pretty much anyone. They're all pretty versatile. So first up is this cute little chapstick holder. It comes together very fast, and you would just clip it onto a bag or something and keeps the chapstick close at hand. You don't need much to put this cute project together. You need 2 rectangles that are 2 inches by 6.5 inches, a square that is 2 inches, and then some sort of clasp that they can use to attach it to whatever they want to attach it to, really. And that's it. So the first prep you'll want to do is to get the 2-inch square ready, and that's going to be the part on the chapstick holder that attaches the holder to the clasp. So fold the square in half and press it, and then you'll fold the ends into that fold and press it, and then you'll fold it in half again one last time and press it, and then just top stitch around it, the edge of it, to hold it in place. You don't really need to top stitch across the raw edges because they're going to get hidden inside of the project. I just top stitched along one because it was easier than cutting the threads and just top stitching along each side. All right, so the next thing you'll want to do is fold one of your pieces in half and press it. All right, and put your prepped loop through the clasp, and then you're going to top stitch it in place right in the middle of the crease you formed. So just do a base stitch across there to hold it in place. All right, on the wrong side of your other fabric, mark a place where you want to start and stop stitching so you can flip this later. Then place the fabric right sides together on top of your project. Where the clasp is, I like to put a clip, especially there, just to hold it in place because it'll want to move around as you sew, and I just want to keep this lined up. So I'm going to start stitching around. And then when I get up to where the clasp is, I'm going to just take my finger and make sure it's out of my seam allowance. You do not want to accidentally sew over it because you will definitely break your needle. All right, and then when I get to the other side, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to push the clasp out of the way because I pushed it over to that side when I was doing the other side. All right, so we left an opening. Now clip your corners. Make sure you don't clip through any of the threads. And now we're going to flip this right sides out. All right, and then press this really well, folding in the raw edges of that opening where we turned the project, and then press really well. I didn't push out one corner. All right, and now we're just going to top stitch along the bottom. And then fold it up, leaving about a 1-inch opening at the top. And we're going to top stitch around the whole piece. Make sure to keep the clasp out of the way of your stitching. All right, and the chapstick holder is finished. It makes a great little gift. Put a new chapstick in it and put it in the stocking of the person you want to gift it to. It's a cute little gift. All right, and so our next gift is some cute, quick coasters. And this project is inspired by these. They are cute little coasters from a panel I received from the Open Gate Quilt subscription box. They come together so quick. I had purchased this panel a while ago that I wanted to use for someone who loves vintage stuff, but I'm kind of running out of time to use it, and I didn't really have a set idea on how I wanted to use it when I got it. So when I looked at these coasters, I knew what to do. I cut out some squares from that panel, and I just chose ones that would work really well with a 5-inch square. So I cut out those 5-inch squares, and then I cut out 4.5-inch pieces of batting, and I cut out 5 inches of some backing fabric that coordinated well with this panel. Now the last one I have to make here, because I'm making 4, is this cute little square from that panel. And this comes together so fast. All you want to do is take the batting piece, line it up, leaving about 1/4 inch all the way around it, and then just quilt a square across it. I just eyeballed it because that's just who I am. So you'll want to cut 2 5-inch squares for each coaster you want to make, and 1 4.5-inch square of batting for each coaster you want to make. I'm making 4 coasters. All right, so the quilting is done on that, and then all you'll want to do is mark an opening that you want to leave to turn this project. So I'm going to lay this right sides together, and then we're just going to stitch all the way around this, leaving an opening for turning. So I'm going to back stitch where I started sewing. Now clip the corners and then turn the project right side out. Press out the corners. Right, and then turn in the seams where we left the project open to turn, and then press this really well. Now we're just going to top stitch around the whole project about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge, and that will help close up that opening that we left to turn this. I think the fun thing about this project is that you could really use any fabric you wanted to. It doesn't have to be any type of panel, just a really pretty fabric that you think the person that you're gifting it to would really like. It's much quicker than piecing a square together to make the coasters. And as long as it's something that the person you're gifting it to would really like, it'll work out beautifully. All right, and so now the final coaster is done for this set. And here is all 4 of them, so you can see them. So what I would do is just stack however many you make together. And then I would just tie some string around it. I'm gonna actually use some lace because this has a really vintage feel, so I think that might work better. I think this piece might be big enough where I can do a really cute little gathering of these. So there we go, a cute little gift. All right, so next up, we're gonna make a pen holder for a journal. And so what you'll need for this project is some fabric and some elastic. So for the fabric, you're going to need 2 pieces that are 3 inches by 8 inches, and then 2 pieces that are 3 inches by 5 inches. Now, to figure out the size that you'll need for the elastic, you're going to want to measure how large your journal cover is and multiply that by 2. And then just subtract the size of the pen holder, which will turn out to be about 7 inches. All right, the first prep we're going to do is for the pen pocket. So place these right sides together and just stitch across one of the short sides. Okay, so flip this over and straighten out the seam the best you can. I like to use like my purple thing to rub against the seam to get it to lay nice and flat, and then press it. Okay, and then top stitch across that side we just sewed. Right, so take one of the longer rectangles and we're just gonna baste stitch this pocket in place to it. So I'm just gonna stitch along the 3 sides, leaving the pocket open. Okay, so we basted around and left the pocket open. And now we're just gonna line up the elastic in the center of both sides and top stitch it in place as well. All right, on the last piece we have here, mark one side of it where you would like to leave an opening to turn this. Now, I want to keep my elastic out of the way when I am working on this last step. So I am going to put a pin in here. Now, you want to leave enough room around it to make sure that you don't accidentally sew across the pin or your elastic. Now lay your final piece right side together on top of everything and put some clips in to hold it in place for when you're sewing. All right, so I'm going to start sewing at one of my marked lines, so all the way around, and end at my other marked line, leaving an opening, and I'm going to back stitch when I start and stop sewing. All right, so clip your corners, make sure you don't clip through any threads, and then turn it right side out through the hole. I'm going to take the pin out so I don't stab myself with it. I'd probably recommend using a thinner elastic. I just wanted to use what I had, and it's working just fine. It worked fine on the demo piece that I made, but I think a thinner one would work even better. or make it a little easier, I should say. But again, I like to use what I have, especially if it's something I don't use a lot, like elastic. All right, and so now you're going to want to fold in your raw edges here and top stitch around to close off that opening. I'm going to press it before I top stitch, but just be careful of your elastic when you're pressing because you don't want to melt it or anything. As you top stitch around, make sure to keep your elastic out of the way. All right, and then so just slide the pen holder over the cover of the book, place some pins in it, and you're ready to go. This would be perfect to gift to someone with a new journal or planner for the new year. Okay, so the next gift we're going to make is a playing card holder. This one is especially good for games like Uno, where you could end up with like a whole deck of cards in your hands. You can organize them out, and it's much easier to hold them all and see what you have. All right, so to make this, you're gonna need 2 pieces of your main fabric that are cut to 8 inches, and I like to put some woven interfacing on the back of them just to keep this a little more stable. And then you will need an 8-inch piece of batting to use as well. And you're going to sandwich these layers and quilt it. You're also going to need 2 pieces of fabric that are 4 inches by 8 inches. And then you'll want to prep some binding. All right, so I'm gonna quilt this really simple, just some straight lines in both directions. All right, so now that our panel is quilted, we're gonna get the pockets ready. Now to prep the pockets, you're gonna take one of the pockets and fold the long end in about 1/4 of an inch, and then press it, and then fold it in one more time and press it again. And we're folding this toward the back of the wrong side of the fabric. All right, now top stitch along the folded edge. All right, now one pocket is prepped. And now for the other pocket, you're gonna fold it in twice again, about 1/4 of an inch for one side. Top stitch along that folded side. And then on the other side, fold it in once and press it. Now this pocket that we just pressed, that we folded one side twice in top stitch and then the other side once, we're gonna place it 3 inches down from the top of the panel. Okay, so we have it placed 3 inches down from the top of the panel. You can put some pins in to hold it in place if you would like, and we're gonna stitch around 3 sides, leaving the pocket open. Okay, so our pocket is open, and then we're gonna put the last pocket on. All right, get it in place. We're just lining it up with the bottom of our card holder, and then stitch around the 3 sides again. And now the only thing you'll need to do is attach your binding using your favorite method. All right, so that is the playing card holder. And you could just pair it with a deck of cards and make a perfect gift out of it. All right, so the last gift we're going to make is a quilt. Yes, a quilt, but it's still going to be fast. Stay with me here. So for the quilt that I'm going to make here, I'm using this beautiful black and white fabric that I found that to me kind of already looks like a gorgeous quilt. And then on the back, I have this beautiful floral fabric. Now, I already basted this quilt, so I just have each of the fabrics with the right sides facing out on them and the batting in the middle. I flattened it out on a table, straightened it all out nice, and then I placed some pins in to hold it all in place. So all I need to do is quilt this. And what I'm going to do is just quilt following the lines here that I already have, so I don't have to mark anything, and it'll be very, very quick. As for the binding, I had this beautiful striped binding that I absolutely love, and I think it'll work great with both sides of this quilt. and I'll show you how I prep my binding. All right, so here is how I prep my binding. I have 2.5-inch strips of binding, and I join them together along the short ends and press the seam open. And then I have my third hand binding tool here that I use to press my binding in half. Now, if you want one of these tools, I'll link it in the description of this video. Just know that when you purchase one, there are different sizes. I got the size for the 2.5-inch strips because that is the size that I like my binding. Then once you get it started, use a needle to push it through. Then you'll see the slot on the top, and then you can pull the binding through that slot, and it's on both sides to help feed it through. All right, attach it to the side of your table or your mat, tighten it on there, and then you're ready to go. When you pull it through, it's just gonna fold your binding for you. And then all you'll need to do is press it as it comes through. Now, once you get to one of your seams, it can be a little tricky to get it through. Just pull gently and it should come through. If you've pressed it nice and flat, sometimes it isn't an issue at all if I'm really careful and get it pressed nice and flat. But that is how I prep my binding. All right, so when I quilt my quilts, I like to put my stitch length up at 3, and I start quilting off of the edge of the top of the quilt and quilt in straight lines when I'm on my just standard sewing machine. I start in the middle of my quilt and work the way out so that if there are any ripples, if I didn't get this nice and straight, I can kind of push them out as I work. As I quilt, I'm just going to remove some of these safety pins as I work through, just so I can get rid of them as I work. You don't want any drag when you're quilting. You don't want the fabric laying down in your lap and pulling. You want to be able to quilt really nice and smooth. Now, this will be a relatively small quilt. I'm just using a yard of each fabric, so it'll be perfect for a baby or a small child or as a nice little lap quilt. All right, so after I follow all of these lines in both directions on the quilt, I'm just going to trim up the quilt to size, and then I'll show you how I add on the binding to finish it off. Look how cute this is already. All right, so I like to put my binding on in 2 different ways. If I have a little extra time, I like to sew my binding to the front of the quilt, flip it to the back, and then hand stitch it down. But since we're doing all these quick, I'm going to stitch the binding to the back of this quilt, flip it to the front, and top stitch it in place. So I'm going to take my binding, put the raw edges of the binding right up against the raw edge of the quilt. I'm going to leave a little bit of a tail to bring the binding together later. And I'm just going to stitch around here. Now when I get about 1/4 inch away from an edge, I'm going to stop stitching, leave my needle down, rotate, and stitch to the corner. Then I'm going to flip my binding up, make a mitered edge, flip it down, and then stitch all the way around here. So I'm going to stitch the binding to the back of this quilt. I'm going to do the same thing at each corner, and then when I'm finished, I'll flip to the front and top stitch it in place, and we'll have our final gift finished. All right, so the gift is all finished. I really love how this quilt turned out. I love the stripe binding. I always try to find a stripe binding if I can. I really love the way a stripe binding looks on a quilt. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you found some gifts that you can quickly make for someone in your life. Let me know in the comments below if you are going to make any of them. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.